A single sketch could be a door to a past you thought was sealed forever. Madison Harper, 28 years old and drowning in medical bills, moved through Bernie's Corner Cafe with the mechanical precision of someone who had stopped thinking about anything beyond the next order, the next tip, the next impossible payment. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like dying insects, casting their merciless glow across vinyl booths that had cracked and faded through decades of use. The air hung heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and bacon grease, the smell of survival, of making it through another shift without collapsing. Her apron pockets sagged with crumpled singles and loose change that could never be enough. Her mother's chemotherapy treatments bled Madison's bank account dry faster than she could refill it, and every morning arrived with a metallic taste of exhaustion coating her tongue. Across the city, in a glass tower that pierced the autumn sky like a shard of polished ice, Benjamin Cross sat in his corner office on the 47th floor. At 52, he had insulated himself from the world with walls of wealth so thick that human struggle became nothing more than an abstraction, a line item on a charitable donation form he'd sign without reading. The mahogany furniture gleamed under recessed lighting. Every surface reflected his image back at him, a man who owned pieces of Chicago but never truly touched the city breathing below. This wasn't a fairy tale about a wealthy benefactor rescuing a struggling waitress. This was the story of how a charcoal sketch, a simple piece of yellowed paper, unraveled 3 decades of carefully constructed lies and exposed a theft that destroyed one family while building another's fortune. The sketch hung behind Benjamin's desk, framed in ornate gold leaf behind protective glass. It showed a revolutionary mixed-use development. Soaring towers integrated with green spaces, pedestrian bridges connecting buildings like veins carrying life through a concrete body. The paper was textured, expensive, the kind artists special ordered. At the bottom right corner sat a distinctive signature, a stylized W intertwined with what looked like a compass rose, rendered in bold strokes that suggested confidence and vision. Benjamin treasured this sketch above everything he owned. It was, he told investors and journalists and business school students, his father's original vision, the blueprint that launched the Cross Empire 30 years ago. Proof of genius. Proof of the family's rightful place at the pinnacle. Madison's father had died when she was 17, leaving behind boxes of sketches and architectural drawings. Robert Harper had been a dreamer who spent his evenings at their kitchen table drawing impossible buildings while bill collectors called. Madison remembered falling asleep to the sound of charcoal pencils scratching across paper, the scent of eraser shavings mixing with her mother's coffee. After his death, her mother kept one sketch framed in their living room. It showed the same towers, the same bridges, the same revolutionary design. And in the bottom right corner, that same signature, except Robert Harper had always signed his work with an art superimposed over a drafting compass. Madison had stared at that sketch for 11 years, never questioning its origin, until the November afternoon when she delivered lunch to the executive suite of Cross Tower, carrying a Caesar salad on a silver tray, and saw her father's sketch hanging behind Benjamin Cross's desk, claimed as another man's genius, valued at millions, displayed as the origin story of an empire. Want to see how a dead architect's daughter brought down Chicago's most powerful dynasty? Subscribe now, because what happens next will prove that truth can still shatter even the most polished lies. Madison pushed through the heavy mahogany door of Benjamin Cross's office, balancing the lunch tray with practiced ease. The space opened before her like a cathedral to wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Chicago's skyline in crystalline detail, Lake Michigan glittering in the distance like scattered diamonds. The leather furniture smelled expensive, that particular scent of quality that whispered rather than shouted. Persian rugs absorbed her footsteps. Everything in the room spoke a language Madison had never learned, the language of money that had always existed, that never worried about running out. Her eyes swept across the office as she moved toward his desk, following the professional script she'd memorized through hundreds of deliveries. Then her gaze landed on the wall behind his chair, and the world tilted sideways. The sketch hung there, framed and lit like a museum piece. Towers rose from the paper in confident charcoal strokes, integrated with green spaces that breathed between concrete and glass. Pedestrian bridges connected the buildings like delicate threads in a spider's web. Every line was familiar. Every curve matched the image burned into Madison's memory from 11 years of walking past it in her living room. The tray trembled in her hands. The Caesar salad's plastic container shifted, nearly sliding off the silver surface. Her father's sketch. It was her father's sketch. The memory flooded through her with physical force, sitting cross-legged on their apartment floor while Robert Harper hunched over the kitchen table, charcoal smudging his fingers as he brought impossible buildings to life on expensive paper he couldn't really afford. The scratch of pencil on texture. The smell of eraser shavings. His tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. That sketch, the one he'd been so proud of, the one her mother had framed after he died because it represented everything he'd dreamed of building. Madison's eyes found the signature in the bottom right corner. The stylized W, with its compass rose flourish, stared back at her. But her father had signed with an R. She knew that. She'd seen it 1,000 times. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The professional mask she wore, the one that let her smile through rudeness and pretend not to notice when customers looked through her like she was invisible, cracked down the middle. Is something wrong? Benjamin's voice cut through her paralysis. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to something sharper as he followed her gaze to the sketch. My father drew that exact sketch. The words escaped before Madison could stop them, her voice cracking on the word father. Benjamin's face drained of color, like someone had opened a valve. His hand, reaching for the water glass on his desk, froze mid-motion. The silence that followed stretched between them like broken glass, waiting for someone to step on it and shatter the moment completely. Then his features rearranged themselves, smoothing into something cold and measured. What do you mean? Each word dropped like a stone into still water. Madison's hands tightened on the tray. The towers, the bridges, the design. My father was Robert Harper. He was an architect. He drew that exact sketch. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. The calculation happening behind them was almost visible. Gears turning, options weighing, threats being assessed. When he looked at her now, he no longer saw a waitress. He saw something dangerous. That's impossible. Benjamin's voice carried the weight of authority. Not a debate, but a verdict. This sketch is unique. A family heirloom. My father created it. He stood, moving around the desk with deliberate slowness. The height difference between them became a weapon. Madison had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, and they both knew it. My father, William Cross, drew this in 1995, Benjamin continued, his tone shifting into the practiced cadence of someone who told this story many times. It's documented, certified, the original blueprint that launched everything you see outside those windows. My father had the same sketch. Madison's voice came out stronger than she expected. I've seen it my entire life. It hung in our living room. Benjamin's expression shifted, patronizing now, the way people looked at children who believed in fairy tales. Perhaps your father saw it in a publication. Perhaps he admired my father's work and made a copy. That's understandable. William Cross was a visionary. Heat flooded Madison's chest. My father died in 2014. This sketch existed in our home long before any publication could have. Your father was either a liar or a thief. Benjamin's words landed like a physical blow. Simple, direct, cruel. Madison's hands shook so badly she had to set the tray down on the edge of his desk before she dropped it. Professional boundaries dissolved like sugar in hot water. My father was a good man. He was honest. He was talented. He would never. Benjamin walked to the window, turning his back on her in a gesture of dismissal, so complete it burned. For a long moment, he stared out at the city he owned pieces of. Then he pulled out his wallet, soft leather, probably worth more than Madison made in a month, and began counting $100 bills onto his desk. For your troubles, he said without looking at her, and your discretion. The insult landed like a slap across her face. He was buying her silence, paying her to disappear, the same way he probably paid for everything inconvenient in his life. "I don't want your money." Madison's voice shook with rage she'd been swallowing for years. Rage at customers who snapped their fingers, at medical bills that never stopped coming, at a world that ground people like her father into dust. "I want the truth." Benjamin's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. Genuine fear flickered across his features before anger rushed in to replace it. "Leave this alone." His voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." He pressed a button on his desk. Within seconds, a security guard appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered, unsmiling, prepared to enforce whatever Benjamin Cross wanted enforced. Madison looked back one last time as the guard's hand closed around her elbow. Benjamin stood at the window, staring at the sketch now, his hands trembling against his sides. He looked like a man who'd just seen a ghost. The elevator doors closed on her view of the 47th floor. But something had hardened inside Madison's chest during that brief, brutal encounter. She would prove her father's authorship. She would expose whatever Benjamin Cross was hiding. The question wasn't whether she'd fight. The question was whether she could win. Madison's hands still trembled as she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her mother's apartment in Pilsen. The building smelled like decades of cooking, cumin and garlic, and generations of families trying to make home feel like something solid. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing in Spanish, children laughing, lives being lived in close quarters where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Eleanor Harper sat in the worn armchair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the radiator's hissing warmth. Chemotherapy had hollowed her out, leaving behind a frail architecture of bone and determination. Her headscarf, soft blue, hand-knitted by a church friend, covered the hair loss she pretended not to mind. Madison's eyes went straight to the sketch on the wall. She'd walked past it thousands of times, but now she moved toward it like someone approaching evidence at a crime scene. The towers rose in confident charcoal strokes. The pedestrian bridges connected buildings with delicate precision. Every single line matched what she'd seen hanging behind Benjamin Cross's desk. She pulled out her phone and photographed it from multiple angles, her pulse hammering in her throat. The signature in the corner showed that stylized W with a compass rose. But her father had signed with an R. She knew that. She'd seen his signature on birthday cards, on sketches he'd given her, on the drawings scattered through their apartment before he died. Madison. Eleanor's voice cut through her focus, thin but alert. "What's wrong?" The story spilled out. The lunch delivery, Benjamin's office, the sketch, his denial, the security guard's hand on her elbow. Madison's words tumbled over each other, anger and confusion and desperation bleeding through every sentence. Eleanor's face didn't register surprise. It registered fear. "Mom." Madison knelt beside the armchair, her voice dropping to something urgent and careful. "Did you know something about this?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap, fingers working against each other like they were trying to untie invisible knots. Then she started talking, and the truth Madison had never known began to unspool. Robert Harper had worked for Cross Development in January 1995. He'd come home those first weeks glowing with excitement, talking about a revolutionary design concept, about William Cross seeing his potential, about finally getting the chance he deserved. He'd worked obsessively, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with architectural visions that seemed impossible and brilliant. 3 weeks later, he'd been fired, escorted out by security, blacklisted, his career destroyed before it had really begun. Robert claimed William Cross had stolen his designs. No one believed him. Eleanor had begged him to let it go. They had baby Madison. They needed stability. They couldn't fight a man with that much power and money. Robert had spiraled into depression, his heart breaking under the weight of injustice no one would acknowledge. He died of a heart attack at 43, and Eleanor had always believed the betrayal killed him more surely than any blocked artery. "Wait here." Eleanor struggled up from the armchair, waving off Madison's help. She disappeared into the bedroom and returned carrying a cardboard box. its corners soft with age and handling. Inside were dozens of sketches, preliminary drawings showing the evolution of the design Madison had just seen in Benjamin's office. And every single one was signed with Robert Harper's distinctive mark, an R superimposed over a drafting compass. Madison's hands shook as she sorted through them. One sketch bore a date, January 12, 1995, months before William Cross had supposedly conceived this revolutionary design. Why does ours have a W signature? Madison held up her phone, showing the photograph of their framed version. Eleanor's face crumpled. After your father died, a lawyer came. William's lawyer. He offered me money for the sketch, $50,000. I refused. He said he'd take it by court order, claim Robert had stolen it from William. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was terrified. I had you to protect. So I let him take it for authentication. When he returned it a week later, the signature had been changed. He gave me $10,000, called it an authentication fee. I used it for your father's funeral. The room tilted. Madison sat back on her heels, the weight of 30 years of buried truth pressing down on her chest like water. He told the truth. The words came out broken. Dad told the truth, and no one believed him, and he died knowing everyone thought he was a liar or a thief. Eleanor reached out with shaking hands, cupping Madison's face. Some doors are best left closed, sweetheart. The Cross family is powerful. They've already taken so much. Don't let them take you too. Madison looked at the box of sketches, her father's genius, his stolen legacy, proof that he'd been exactly who he'd claimed to be. She thought about the medical bills piling up on the kitchen counter, about her dead-end job that had just humiliated her, about the fact that fighting this battle might destroy what little they had left. Then she thought about her father bent over the kitchen table, charcoal smudging his fingers, bringing impossible buildings to life with nothing but talent and hope. Dad deserves to have his name cleared. Madison stood, the decision settling into her bones like something that had always been there waiting. I'm doing this. Dr. Sarah Chen's office at the Art Institute smelled like old paper and preservation chemicals. She was 40-something, with silver streaking through her black hair and the kind of intense focus that came from spending decades studying things most people never noticed. She spread Madison's photographs across her desk, then examined the preliminary sketches from Robert's archive with a jeweler's loupe. This is fascinating. Dr. Chen's voice carried the measured excitement of an academic who'd stumbled onto something significant. The dual signature mystery alone makes this worth investigating. But if what you're suggesting is true, she looked up, dark eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. We could scientifically date the paper, determine which sketch came first. Madison's heart jumped. How? Paper contains radioactive isotopes from atmospheric nuclear testing. We can measure the decay and pinpoint when it was manufactured. Dr. Chen set down the loupe, but we'd need access to Benjamin Cross's sketch for testing. Without his cooperation, that's impossible. The hope that had flared guttered like a candle in wind. Dr. Chen must have seen it in Madison's face. However, she tapped the preliminary drawings. We can establish your father's distinctive style. These show clear evolution of the design, proof of original authorship. The charcoal grade, the line work, the way he renders shadows. It's like a fingerprint. She spent the next hour analyzing Robert's archive, photographing details, making notes in precise handwriting. Her professional opinion. These sketches demonstrated original creative development. But opinion wasn't courtroom evidence. They needed something harder. Madison spent the next 3 days drowning in research. She discovered William Cross had died in 2003, 22 years ago, leaving his empire to Benjamin. She found a Chicago Tribune article from March 1995 announcing William's revolutionary development concept. The date came after Robert's preliminary sketches. Through a Freedom of Information request, Madison obtained employment records. Robert Harper had worked for Cross Development from January 3rd to January 24th, 1995. Termination reason: creative differences. 21 days. Her father's entire career with Cross Development had lasted 21 days. Madison began reaching out to former cross-development employees through LinkedIn. Most ignored her messages. Others responded with terse refusals, fear of litigation clear in their brief, careful words. NDAs signed decades ago still had teeth. Then Margaret Kowalski agreed to meet for coffee. She was 70-something now, with white hair and hands that shook slightly as she stirred cream into her cup. But her memory was sharp, and her conscience had apparently been bothering her for 30 years. "I remember your father." Margaret's voice carried the soft Chicago accent of someone who'd never left the neighborhood where they were born. He was young, talented. He worked like the building was on fire, stayed late every night, filled sketchbook after sketchbook. She described how William Cross had taken unusual interest in Robert's projects, requesting to see all his work samples. Then one morning in late January, Robert had been escorted out by security, shouting about theft, his career ending before lunch. William came out of his office, carrying a portfolio of drawings. Margaret stared into her coffee like she could see the past reflected there. "Your father's portfolio. I always wondered, but I stayed quiet. I was a single mother. I needed that job." She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of office memos, William requesting Robert's work samples, instructions to compile all preliminary designs, orders to document everything Robert produced. Madison's hands tightened on the folder. It was something, but it wasn't enough. "You need more than an old secretary's memory," Margaret said gently. "You need someone with a platform, someone who can make people listen." That night, Madison found Marcus Rivera's contact information. He was an investigative journalist who'd built a reputation exposing corporate corruption, the kind of reporter who didn't back down when lawyers started making threats. His response to her initial email was skeptical. "Old story. Powerful family. Difficult to prove without access to the original sketch." Madison sent him photographs of the archive, copies of the employment records, Margaret's testimony. Then she waited. His reply came at 2 in the morning. "This could be huge. But we need more. We need Benjamin's sketch examined. I have an idea." Marcus's plan was simple and risky. He'd request an interview with Benjamin about the Cross Empire's legacy, the kind of puff piece corporations loved. During the interview, he'd ask pointed questions about the famous sketch, plant seeds of doubt publicly, force Benjamin into a corner where refusing examination looked guilty, but agreeing meant scientific proof of the truth. Madison stared at Marcus's email until her vision blurred. This was it, the moment when she stopped gathering evidence in secret and started a war she might not survive. Her phone buzzed. A text from a cafe owner. "Sorry, Madison. You're being let go effective immediately. Nothing personal." She knew exactly whose influence had reached Bernie's Corner Cafe. Benjamin Cross's reach extended further than she'd imagined. Madison looked at the box of her father's sketches sitting on the kitchen table, at the framed version on the wall with its altered signature, at her mother asleep in the next room, oxygen machine humming its mechanical lullaby. She typed her response to Marcus. "Let's do it. Some fights chose you whether you were ready or not." Marcus Rivera's camera crew set up in Benjamin Cross's office like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Lights on stands, microphones clipped to expensive suits, the whole professional apparatus of modern media turning Benjamin's sanctuary into a television set. Benjamin sat behind his desk, relaxed and confident, the sketch hanging behind him like a family crest. The interview started as expected. Softball questions about the Cross Empire's success, Benjamin's vision for the future, the legacy of his father's genius. Benjamin delivered polished answers, the kind of corporate poetry he'd perfected over years of investor meetings and business school lectures. Then Marcus shifted. "The sketch behind you, your father's original design from 1995. Can you prove its authenticity and date?" Benjamin's smile never wavered. "Of course. We have a certificate of authenticity from 1995, signed by a certified appraiser." He produced the document with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. Marcus leaned forward. "Here's an interesting coincidence. A waitress claims her father drew that identical sketch. Robert Harper. He worked for Cross Development in January 1995. Benjamin's face changed, just for a fraction of a second. Something flickered beneath the polished surface. He recovered quickly, cameras still rolling, trapped by his own public platform. That's unfortunate. Perhaps her father saw my father's work and made a copy. It happens. Marcus slid employment records across the desk. These show Robert Harper was fired January 24, 1995. Your father announced his revolutionary design in March. The timeline doesn't support your version. Benjamin's lawyer materialized from the corner of the office, like a shark sensing blood. This interview is over. All footage is property of Cross Development under the terms of the media agreement. But Marcus had recorded backup on his phone. He had enough. The article went live that evening. Did Chicago's real estate dynasty begin with theft? The internet did what the internet does. Picked sides, argued in comment sections, turned a 30-year-old injustice into entertainment. Benjamin's PR team launched a counterattack within hours. Madison became a gold digger in the official narrative, an opportunist trying to extract money from a grieving family's legacy. Anonymous sources suggested Eleanor had fabricated the sketches after Robert's death. The threatening messages started immediately. Legal letters arrived by courier. Madison's landlord received calls. Her mother's home care nurse reported harassment. The machinery of wealth and power ground into motion, designed to crush anyone who stepped out of line. Then Bernie's Corner Cafe fired her officially, and Madison understood exactly how thorough this destruction would be. She sat in her dark apartment 3 nights later, staring at the sketch on the wall, when someone knocked. It was past midnight. Normal people didn't visit at midnight unless something was very wrong. Benjamin Cross stood in her hallway alone. No lawyers, no security detail. Just a man who looked 10 years older than he had in his office. His expensive coat wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. I need to know the truth. His voice came out rough. About my father. Madison should have slammed the door. Instead, she stepped aside. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where her father had drawn impossible buildings 30 years ago. Benjamin explained in careful, hollow words how he'd built his entire identity on William Cross's legend. What if that legend was a lie? After Marcus's article, he'd started looking through his father's old papers, found journals with cryptic entries about necessary acquisition, and Harper Problem Solved dated January 1995. Either my father was a thief or you're a liar trying to extort money from my family. Benjamin's hands shook around the coffee mug Madison had given him. The evidence keeps mounting. I can't ignore it anymore. Madison saw it then, not a villain, but another victim of William Cross's choices. Both of them living in the blast radius of decisions made before they could understand the consequences. Our quest for truth is now inextricably linked. Benjamin's words sounded like something he'd rehearsed, formal and strange in the cramped kitchen. But his meaning was clear. He offered resources, money for scientific analysis, access to forensic experts, the weight of his name behind the investigation. Madison offered her father's archive, the employment records, Margaret's testimony. A reluctant partnership formed across the table where Robert Harper had once dreamed of buildings he'd never see completed. They hired Dr. Patricia Huang, a forensic document examiner whose testimony had overturned convictions and exposed frauds across 3 continents. She examined both sketches with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film, microscopes that could see individual fibers, infrared imaging that revealed what human eyes couldn't detect. The results came back conclusive. Benjamin's sketch showed signs of signature alteration. Beneath the W, infrared imaging revealed the ghost of Robert Harper's, our compass design. Someone had professionally altered it between 1995 and 2000 skillful work, but nothing could completely erase what had been there first. Paper dating confirmed the sketch was created in January 1995. Charcoal analysis matched the rare grade Robert had used, purchased from a supplier that had gone out of business in 1998. Scientific conclusion: Robert Harper had created the sketch. Someone had changed the signature afterward. Benjamin's world collapsed in Dr. Huang's sterile laboratory. His father was a thief. The empire was built on stolen genius. Everything he believed about his family, about himself, about where he'd come from. Lies stacked on lies until the weight became unbearable. But a deeper question emerged as they stared at the forensic reports. Who had changed Eleanor's sketch signature to match? The name surfaced from Benjamin's review of his father's legal team. Richard Ashford, William Cross's personal attorney, the man who'd handled all sensitive matters, the fixer who'd made problems disappear. Still alive, still practicing, senior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. Madison remembered her mother's story. William's lawyer visiting after Robert's death, taking the sketch for authentication, returning it with an altered signature. The timeline aligned perfectly with Ashford's involvement. They went to Eleanor together, gentle with their questions, careful not to frighten her. But Eleanor remembered more now, details surfacing after 30 years of trying to forget. The lawyer had been smooth, threatening, offering $50,000 in one breath and legal destruction in the next. When she'd refused to sell, he'd warned he'd take the sketch by court order, claim Robert had stolen it from William. She panicked, agreed to authentication. The sketch returned a week later with the signature changed, and the lawyer had explained in that oily, reasonable voice that this protected everyone. Her husband had copied their client's work, but they were willing to be generous. $10,000 to cover funeral expenses and ensure everyone moved forward. Eleanor had believed she had no choice. So she'd taken the money, buried her husband, and buried the truth with him. Benjamin accessed Cross Development's archived billing records. The paper trail told its own story. January 1995 payments for intellectual property acquisition services. February 2014 payment for estate settlement consultation, dated 1 week after Robert Harper's death. Ashford had orchestrated both the original theft and the 30-year cover-up. His law office occupied the top floor of a building his firm partially owned. Glass and steel, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted. Ashford greeted them warmly, silver-haired and distinguished, assuming Benjamin needed standard legal advice. Then Madison stepped into view, and his expression froze for just a heartbeat before professional smoothness returned. They laid out the evidence like prosecutors building a case. Forensic reports, altered signatures, billing records documenting decades of cover-up. Ashford's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold and calculating. I followed client instructions. His voice carried the practiced certainty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. William Cross claimed rightful ownership. All my actions were legal, conducted within attorney-client privilege. The statute of limitations expired decades ago. Madison's anger ignited like paper catching flame. You knew my father was the real creator. Ashford's response came without hesitation or shame. Your father was a nobody. William gave that sketch value. He had capital and connections. Your father had pencils. The deeper truth spilled out then, Ashford clearly believing they couldn't touch him. William hadn't just stolen one sketch. He'd taken Robert's entire portfolio, 43 revolutionary concepts that became the foundation for Cross Development's $3 billion empire. Buildings across Chicago, all based on designs Robert Harper had created at his kitchen table while his pregnant wife slept in the next room. Benjamin's face drained of color. His entire legacy, fraud. Every building bearing the Cross name, a monument to theft. Ashford threatened them with standard lawyer certainty. Expose this, destroy thousands of jobs, crash property values, unleash economic chaos. As if collective harm justified individual evil. My father's legacy matters more than your profit margins, Madison said, and meant it. Ashford played his final card, documents from 2014 showing Eleanor's signature on a legal release. She'd accepted payment and waived all future claims. Binding agreement, notarized and recorded. Madison's hope crumbled like old paper. Her mother had legally surrendered their rights. You have no case. Ashford's smugness filled the room like smoke. This is over. Benjamin asked quietly, what about the moral case? The truth. Ashford actually laughed. Morality doesn't build empires. Winning does. They left defeated, Ashford confident behind them. But as they waited for the elevator, Benjamin noticed something on the building directory. Cross-development was still listed among Ashford's clients. The realization hit like cold water. Ashford currently represented the company. His billable hours, his ongoing retainer, his reputation, all tied to cross-development success. He wasn't just protecting William's memory. He was protecting his own fortune. The hidden villain had more to lose than anyone if the truth emerged. And that gave them leverage they hadn't known they had. If you're watching a powerful man realize his entire empire is built on theft, subscribe now, because the twist coming next will prove that some lies are too big to stay buried forever. Benjamin's hands shook as he worked the combination to William Cross's personal safe. His father had installed it in the study of the family estate, a room Benjamin had preserved exactly as William left it when he died 22 years ago. The safe had remained locked, its contents unknown, a sealed piece of his father's life Benjamin had never felt entitled to open. Until now. Inside was Robert Harper's stolen portfolio. 43 sketches, every single one signed with that distinctive compass design. Detailed architectural concepts decades ahead of their time, calculations that showed mathematical genius, innovations that had shaped Chicago's skyline. William's handwritten notes covered the margins, used for River North project. Patent this immediately. Gold mine. But deeper in the safe, beneath the stolen art, lay legal documents that changed everything. A partnership agreement dated January 8, 1995. William Cross and Robert Harper. The contract was explicit. Robert would provide designs. William would provide capital and development expertise. Profit sharing at 60-40 in William's favor. Robert's signature on the contract looked authentic, witnessed and notarized. Benjamin's mind reeled. This wasn't theft. This was partnership. Why had William fired Robert 3 weeks later? Then he found the amendment. January 24, 1995, buyout agreement. William purchasing Robert's partnership share for $25,000. Robert's signature appeared on this document too. But something was wrong with that signature. It looked shaky, uncertain. Nothing like Robert's confident hand on the partnership agreement or the sketches. Dr. Michael Torres was a handwriting expert who'd testified in fraud cases from New York to Los Angeles. His analysis took 3 days and cost more than Madison had earned in the past year. His conclusion came back unambiguous. The partnership signatures were authentic. The buyout signature was forged. Robert Harper had never agreed to sell his share. William Cross had manufactured the document. Bank records told the rest of the story. $25,000 had been deposited to Robert's account on January 24, 1995. But the money came from Ashford's law firm trust account, not William Cross directly. A paper trail deliberately created to support the fraud. The truth crystallized with devastating clarity. William had offered partnership. Robert had accepted in good faith, excited about finally getting his chance. 3 weeks later, William wanted full ownership. Robert refused. So Ashford forged a buyout agreement, deposited money to create evidence, and William fired his partner before Robert could fight back. Robert had tried to contest it, but he had a pregnant wife, no resources for legal warfare, and William Cross's lawyers threatening to destroy what little he had left. So he'd given up, taken the money, and watched his designs become someone else's empire. Everything we thought we knew was backwards. Benjamin's voice sounded hollow in Madison's apartment. My father wasn't a visionary. He was a calculating thief with a powerful lawyer. Your father wasn't a failure. He was a cheated partner who lost everything. The entire Cross empire existed because of a forged document and intimidation. Every building, every success, every piece of Benjamin's identity built on fraud. Madison confronted her mother one more time. Eleanor had been protecting her. She understood that. But Eleanor had also lied. She'd known about the partnership. Robert had told her everything before he died, made her promise to let it go, to keep Madison safe from Ashford's threats. Your father made me swear. Eleanor's tears soaked into her oxygen mask. He didn't want you fighting his battles. She pulled out the original partnership agreement, pristine and notarized, hidden in Robert's archive box for 30 years. The proof that Robert Harper had been co-owner of everything William Cross built. "I was protecting you from Ashford," Eleanor whispered. "But seeing you fight anyway, I realized silence was the wrong choice." The partnership agreement changed everything. This wasn't about copyright or stolen art. This was partnership fraud with active concealment. Eleanor's 2014 settlement meant nothing. She'd never had authority to waive Robert's partnership rights. Benjamin made his decision that night. "We take this public. All of it." Madison hesitated. "Your family's reputation will be destroyed." "My family's reputation is already a lie." Benjamin's voice carried the weight of someone who'd lost everything and found strange freedom in the emptiness. Time for truth. They planned the revelation for Cross Development's annual gala in 1 week. 500 guests, investors, politicians, media, Chicago's elite assembled in one place. Benjamin would use his speech platform to expose everything. Ashford would be there, confident and untouchable on his own territory. The risk was enormous. Ashford would fight back with legal warfare and character assassination. Criminal charges were possible. They might lose everything. "What if we lose?" Madison's voice cracked. "What if he buries this again?" Benjamin looked at the box of Robert Harper's sketches sitting between them on the table. "Then, at least we tried. Your father deserves that much." The grand ballroom at Navy Pier glittered like something from another world. Crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across Chicago's most powerful citizens. Champagne flowed. An orchestra played background elegance. Women wore dresses that cost more than Madison's yearly rent. Men discussed deals that would reshape neighborhoods. Madison stood near the edge in a borrowed formal dress, feeling like an infiltrator behind enemy lines. Eleanor sat beside her in a wheelchair, oxygen tanks softly hissing, but her eyes were bright and determined. She'd insisted on witnessing this, no matter how weak chemotherapy had left her. Across the room, Richard Ashford held court near the bar, surrounded by admirers. He noticed Madison and raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast, so confident he couldn't conceive of losing. Benjamin took the stage to enthusiastic applause. Screens behind him displayed Cross Tower against the Chicago skyline, company achievements rendered in slick corporate graphics, William Cross's portrait gazing down like a patron saint of capitalism. "Tonight, I want to tell you the true story of Cross Development." Benjamin's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd given 100 speeches just like this. The audience settled, expecting the usual corporate celebration. "My father, William Cross, was a thief." The gasps rippled through the ballroom like wind through wheat. Confused murmurs. Ashford shot to his feet, face darkening. The screens changed. Robert Harper's original sketches appeared. Towers and bridges and revolutionary designs, all signed with that distinctive R compass mark. Benjamin explained in clear, damning detail. The partnership agreement. The stolen portfolio. The forged buyout. Forensic analysis of signature alterations. Document dating that proved every word. The paper trail of 30 years of active cover-up. Ashford moved toward the stage, trying to intervene, but security, Benjamin's security, loyal to their current CEO, blocked his path. Every building bearing the Cross name was designed by Robert Harper. Benjamin's voice never wavered. The screens showed comparison images, Robert sketches next to completed buildings standing across Chicago's skyline. Perfect matches. Undeniable correlation. 43 stolen concepts. "This is Robert Harper's daughter." Benjamin gestured to Madison. She joined him on stage, her voice shaking but clear. She described her father, talented and honest, destroyed by powerful men's greed. She showed a photograph of Robert at his drafting table, young and hopeful, before William Cross and Richard Ashford broke him. She explained how he died, discredited and impoverished, believing everyone thought he was a liar. How her mother's cancer was being paid for with medical debt that should never have existed. how the money that should have been Robert's partnership share had built yachts and vacation homes instead of saving his family. This is slander. Ashford's shout cut through the ballroom. Legal proceedings will follow. Benjamin's response was surgical. Then let's discuss your legal work, Richard. The screens displayed Ashford's billing records. Forged signature analysis. Eleanor's coerced settlement. Evidence of a cover-up spanning 3 decades, orchestrated by the man currently trying to leave through blocked exits, while reporters filmed everything. Ashford's face drained of color as he realized his own criminal liability was being exposed to 500 witnesses, with phones recording every second. Benjamin's final revelation landed like a bomb. The original partnership agreement, witnessed and notarized. Eleanor's settlement was invalid. She'd never had authority to waive Robert's ownership rights. Legal opinion from independent counsel. Cross-development legally belonged half to Robert Harper's estate. You'll destroy the company. Ashford's desperation broke through his professional veneer. Thousands will lose jobs. Madison's response cut through the ballroom. My father lost everything. You can't hide behind employees. Eleanor was wheeled to the microphone. She removed her oxygen mask, voice weak but perfectly clear. Richard Ashford visited me the day after my husband's funeral. He threatened a grieving widow and forced me to alter evidence to protect his client's theft. The audience turned on Ashford. Muttering became anger, became phones recording his humiliation for posterity. Ashford tried one final play, attorney-client privilege, following instructions, legal immunity. But Benjamin produced William's journals. No privilege protected criminal conspiracy. The entries proved William knew exactly what he was stealing, celebrated getting away with it, specifically mentioned Ashford's role in handling the Harper problem. Ashford's arrogance crumbled. His earlier words, morality doesn't build empires. Winning does, thrown back in his face by Madison. You're not winning anymore. Police detectives moved through the crowd. White-collar crime unit, invited by Benjamin specifically for this moment. They had questions about fraud, forgery, witness intimidation, conspiracy. Richard Ashford was escorted out of the ballroom. He'd entered like royalty, no longer commanding respect. Just another criminal who'd finally been caught. Benjamin addressed the stunned crowd. Cross-development would make this right. Partnership share paid to Eleanor Harper with full accounting. Every building's true architect publicly acknowledged. Robert Harper's name replacing William Cross on company headquarters. The gala ended in chaos and camera flashes, and the sound of an empire's foundation cracking under the weight of truth it could no longer suppress. 3 months later, winter arrived in Chicago with the kind of snowfall that transformed the city into something softer, cleaner. White covering gray, fresh starts made visible. Madison stood at the window of her mother's apartment, watching flakes drift past streetlights, and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The apartment looked different now. Medical equipment hummed in the corner. The good kind, the expensive kind that came with actual hope attached. A home nurse moved through the kitchen preparing Eleanor's medications, paid for by insurance that actually covered experimental treatments. Comfortable furniture had replaced the worn pieces that had sagged under decades of financial strain. Eleanor sat in a new armchair by the window, color returning to her cheeks. The tumor that had been killing her shrinking under chemotherapy that cost more per month than Madison used to make in a year. Madison no longer worked double shifts at Bernie's Corner Cafe. She was enrolled at the Illinois Institute of Technology's architecture program, the same school her father had attended 40 years ago. Following his dream, walking halls he'd walked, learning the same principles he'd mastered at kitchen tables while bill collectors called. The partnership settlement had been $47 million, not the full half of the empire's value. Benjamin's lawyers and Eleanor's lawyers had negotiated something both sides could accept. But it was enough. More than enough. Enough to transform lives that had been slowly drowning for as long as Madison could remember. Eleanor had established the Robert Harper Architectural Scholarship, annual awards for struggling students who had talent but no resources. Her husband's legacy living forward through other dreamers who deserved their chance. Cross Development had been renamed Harper Cross Development Group. The company headquarters bore both names now, acknowledging the partnership that should have been recognized 3 decades earlier. Benjamin had resigned as CEO, installed an independent board, stepped back from daily operations. His role now was truth and reconciliation, investigating his father's other victims, repairing damage, trying to make amends for theft he hadn't committed but had benefited from his entire life. Madison and Benjamin met weekly for coffee now, an unlikely friendship forged in shared trauma. Both of them children of complicated fathers, both trying to build something honest from inherited lies. Benjamin funded Madison's education, mentored her architectural studies, offered advice that came from actually understanding the industry she was entering. She showed him her sketches during their meetings. The talent was there, inherited, undeniable, her father's vision flowing through her hands onto paper. Benjamin recognized Robert's techniques in Madison's line work, and sometimes his eyes would go distant and sad, mourning the partnership that could have been. Richard Ashford faced criminal charges: fraud, forgery, witness intimidation, conspiracy. His law license was suspended pending investigation. His firm partnership was revoked. His reputation, carefully built over 40 years, destroyed in one evening at Navy Pier. Civil suits from other families emerged as investigators dug deeper. The pattern became clear. Robert Harper might not have been Ashford's only victim. Margaret Kowalski was writing a memoir about corporate corruption and the cost of silence. Her testimony had inspired others to come forward with their own stories of careers destroyed and innovation stolen. Cross-development's culture was being examined, audited, held up to light that revealed how many bodies were buried in the foundation. Eleanor's health stabilized. The experimental therapy was working. The tumor was shrinking. Hope, that dangerous, precious thing, rekindled in a woman who'd spent years preparing to die. She'd had Robert's sketch reframed, the original signature restored. The arc compass design was visible again, her husband's mark on the world finally acknowledged. Visitors came to see it now. Architecture students, historians, people who wanted to witness the physical proof that truth could survive 3 decades of burial. Dr. Sarah Chun from the Art Institute was planning an exhibition, Stolen Genius, Robert Harper's Chicago. All 43 original sketches would be displayed with full attribution and public acknowledgement. The opening was scheduled for the anniversary of Robert's death, memorial and celebration combined. Benjamin discovered 3 other architects fired from cross-development in the 1990s with similar patterns of theft. He established a compensation fund, seeking to make amends beyond Robert's case. He couldn't undo the past, but he could acknowledge the harm and provide resources for healing. Madison's first architecture assignment was designing a memorial to forgotten creators. Her concept showed a public plaza with sketches etched in stone, stories of stolen visions made permanent and visible. Her professor praised the work. "You understand that buildings tell human stories." Madison thought of her father and wished desperately that he could see this moment. Eleanor reminisced one evening, holding Madison's hand in the warm apartment that no longer smelled like desperation. "Your father would be so proud. Not of the money, of your courage. He always said architecture was about legacy. You gave him his." Madison visited Robert's grave on a Saturday morning, carrying fresh flowers and architecture textbooks. She knelt in the snow and told him everything, about school, about the renamed company, about justice finally arriving 30 years late. "You were right all along, Dad. And now everyone knows." Benjamin visited William's grave separately, bringing no flowers, just reckoning. "I wish you'd done the right thing. I wish I'd known sooner." He decided to establish an ethics program at business schools, using William Cross as a cautionary tale about the cost of corruption. The final scene unfolded at a groundbreaking ceremony for Harper Cross Development's new affordable housing project. The design used principles from Robert's revolutionary sketches: green spaces integrated with living spaces, community built into architecture. Madison had been invited to speak, nervous and honored, wearing her father's old drafting compass as a necklace. She talked about second chances, about truth's power, about legacy beyond buildings. Eleanor sat in the front row, wrapped in blankets against the cold, smiling through tears, holding a photograph of young Robert bent over his drafting table. Benjamin introduced Madison to the assembled crowd, the daughter of my father's partner, and a future architect who will carry both their legacies forward. The applause felt like vindication. Cameras flashed. Robert Harper's name was spoken with respect by people who would shape Chicago's future. Madison turned the first shovel of earth, breaking ground on something her father had started 3 decades ago. Snow continued falling across the city, covering everything in clean white, promising fresh beginnings to anyone brave enough to believe in them. True wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you do with the truth. Madison Harper's transformation from struggling waitress to architecture student wasn't just about money, though the $47 million certainly helped. It was about reclaiming stolen dignity, about a daughter refusing to let her father's name stay buried under lies that served other people's fortunes. Benjamin Cross showed rare courage, choosing truth over comfortable lies, using privilege for justice instead of self-protection. Most people in his position would have fought harder to preserve the family legend. He chose differently, and that choice mattered. Eleanor's vindication came 30 years too late to save her husband, but it lifted a burden she'd carried in silence for 3 decades. The settlement gave her peace in whatever time remained, allowed her to see her daughter flourish, let her establish a legacy that would help others avoid Robert's fate. Robert Harper was no longer remembered as a failed dreamer. Buildings across Chicago's skyline now carried his name. His vision was acknowledged. The architect who died discredited and broken had been resurrected as Chicago's hidden genius, finally given credit that should never have been stolen. Richard Ashford's downfall served as a reminder that enablers face consequences too. Lawyers and advisors who facilitate theft share moral culpability with the primary criminals. Justice came for him eventually, as it should. But broader questions remained. How many other creators had been erased by powerful men? Corporate history was filled with stolen innovations and buried partnerships. The sketch's journey, from Robert's kitchen table to museum exhibition, proved that physical evidence could expose empires built on lies. Eleanor's box of preliminary sketches had saved their case. Family memories mattered. Madison's childhood recollections provided crucial details that forensic science later confirmed. Sometimes the powerless do win when they refuse to stay silent. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Truth emerged after 3 decades because one waitress saw something impossible and chose to fight instead of accept dismissal. If this story restored your faith that speaking up matters, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold stories where truth defeats power against impossible odds. Share this with someone who needs hope that their voice can shatter lies. Drop a comment. Have you witnessed injustice that needs exposing? Every building, every empire, every fortune has a human story behind it. Question who gets credit. Question whose names are remembered and whose are deliberately forgotten. Madison Harper sat at her drafting table in her new apartment, working on an assignment due Monday. Her sketch showed a mixed-use development with integrated green spaces, revolutionary and practical, beautiful and functional. In the bottom right corner, she signed it with her father's compass design, modified slightly to make it her own. Next generation carrying forward, talent and integrity combined. The sketch that changed everything hangs in a museum now, where everyone can see it. Robert Harper's Our Compass signature is visible under gallery lighting, his genius finally acknowledged. His story told to thousands of visitors who learn that truth can survive burial and emerge victorious. Madison visits sometimes, standing in front of her father's work, knowing she gave him what he'd been denied in life, the simple recognition that he created something magnificent, and no amount of money or power could erase that truth forever.